Before I begin, I want to say that all the incidents shared here are real and collected from many people. Some events may seem small, some big, and some unusual that is completely natural. I am starting with the first story. In 2004, my family moved into a beautiful 3-story house on the outskirts of the city. It was a masterpiece of architecture, built with a specific dream in mind. The original owners had intended to live there forever, but after the sudden, tragic death of the matriarch, the family fled to America, leaving the house behind like a discarded shell. For the first 2 years, the house was a sanctuary, but in the 3rd year, the walls began to talk. It started with a sound from the shallow, stagnant pond on the west side of the property, a place where the air always felt a few degrees colder. At midnight, the unmistakable wail of a crying infant would drift from the water. Soon, the cries multiplied. We heard dogs howling in pain and cats screaming in the dead of night. Yet, when we rushed outside with flashlights, the yard was empty. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The terror soon moved inside. We occupied the ground floor, but one of the 5 rooms remained locked and empty. One night, I heard hushed whispering coming from behind that door. Multiple voices, plotting in shadows. Then came the bathroom of shadows. The light bulbs in the main guest bathroom began to explode. I replaced 10 bulbs in a single month. Electricians checked the wiring and found nothing. We eventually gave up and left the room in permanent darkness. It was then that we learned the truth from a neighbor. Years ago, a young maid had taken her own life in that very room. The caretaker later confessed, begging for our forgiveness for keeping the secret. My mother, a woman of immense faith and courage, refused to leave. She wanted to face whatever was haunting us, but the house fought back. The day before my birthday, I fell into a deep, heavy sleep. I dreamt I was sitting on my bed when a small boy, no older than 8 walked through the closed door. His skin was the color of midnight, and his eyes were unnaturally large. He leaned in and whispered, "You, your mother, and everyone else. Leave this place now. If you don't, something will be taken from you." I bolted upright, the warning ringing in my ears. The very next day, my birthday, at the exact hour of my dream, my mother slipped on a perfectly dry floor, her hip shattered, leaving her bedridden for 4 months. The final warning came from the most unlikely source. A group of masked men broke into our home. They ransacked the upper floors, but when they reached us, they took almost nothing. Instead, as they were leaving, the lead robber looked at my mother and me with genuine fear in his eyes. "Get out of this house," he urged. "We've seen things here tonight that shouldn't exist. If you stay, you won't survive." 2 days before we finally moved out, my mother was in deep meditation. She saw a vision that explained everything. Beneath the foundation of her bedroom, deep in the earth, lay a hidden chamber. Inside, side by side, were 2 ancient stone idols, hundreds of years old, buried long before the house was ever built. We realized then that we weren't just living in a haunted house. We were living on top of something ancient and hungry. We moved the next morning and never looked back. Every incident shared here comes from real people. Some feel overwhelming, and some sound so strange that they don't fit into logic at all. But all of them were lived by someone. This story is one of those. The river was never just a body of water to the men in my family. It was an obsession. Even now, nearly 3 decades later, the elders still whisper about the ship, a dark bend where the river branches collide to form a deep, swirling pool. They say the current there is like a magnet, pulling boats under and keeping whatever it catches. They say no one has ever found its bottom. 27 years ago, On a night where the clouds completely choked out the moon, my grandfather and his younger brother, Elias, ignored the village warnings. They were fish-drunk, driven by a primal late-night adrenaline that made them feel invincible. Armed with nothing but a kerosene lantern and iron spears, they hiked deep into the wilderness, miles away from the nearest soul. The air was thick, silent, and smelled of wet earth and decay. By 3:30 a.m., they reached the edge of the ship. The water was unnaturally still, like a sheet of black glass. Then, the amber glow of their lantern hit something. Resting just 2 feet below the surface was a monster, a giant wallago catfish, nearly 8 feet long, its massive silver body suspended in the dark. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just waited. Greed took over. Grandfather held the lantern high while Elias gripped his spear. On a silent count of 3 they lunged, driving their iron blades into the water with everything they had. But the blades hit nothing. In the split second before impact, the giant fish didn't swim away. It transformed. In its place, rising from the depths on a raft of rotted wood, was a corpse wrapped in a tattered white shroud. The change was so fast it defied logic. In the flickering light of the lantern, they saw the body's face, a horrific, mangled mask of shredded skin, as if it had been clawed by something with razor-sharp nails. Its eyes were wide, milky white, and staring straight up at the sky. Terror finally hit them. They scrambled up the muddy bank and ran in opposite directions. Not looking back, Grandfather collapsed in our yard at dawn. His mind fractured and his clothes soaked in sweat. His first words were, "Where is Elias?" The family searched for a full day, finding nothing. It wasn't until the next morning, near a shallow pit just 20 yards from the Vortex, that they found him. Elias was lying face down in the mud. When Grandfather turned the body over, he let out a scream that the village still talks about. Elias's face had become the face of the shrouded corpse. His skin was covered in deep, fresh claw marks, and a foul, pungent smell of rotting fish rose from his pores. Most terrifyingly, his eyes, once full of life, were now frozen open, staring at nothing with that same glassy, dead glare. During the final burial rites, the local imam and the healers noticed something impossible. As they washed the body, a thick, yellow fluid seeped from Elias's skin instead of water. Grandfather lived for many years after that, but he never truly left that riverbank. Every few nights, he would wake up screaming for his brother. He passed away 6 months ago, but even in his final days, he wept, knowing that some debts to the river are never truly settled. Now I am moving on to the next story. I have gathered the details of the story, and I will describe them as they are. In the villages of my youth, there was one rule every child knew by heart: never answer the first call. If you hear your name in the dark, or a knock at your door after sunset, you stay silent. You wait. A human will call a third time. The things that hide in the shadows rarely have that much patience. My aunt learned this the hard way. It started with a rhythmic tapping on her front door just after twilight. Being polite, she opened it to find my grandfather standing there. He didn't say a word. He simply brushed past her and walked into the house. As he moved, the air filled with the heavy, sweet scent of his signature fragrance, that traditional perfume he wore every single day. She turned to close the door, and when she looked back, the hallway was empty. There was no grandfather, no footsteps, just the lingering, haunting fragrance of a man who was supposed to be miles away. This happened 4 times. Each time, the scent was more overpowering, and the phantom grandfather felt more solid, yet more hollow. But the world is full of these glitches. Years later, while I was a university student, I was working in a remote district in Turkish. Every day at my campus bus stop, I saw the same man, a local vagrant who never spoke, just sat in the dirt, lost in his own mind. One afternoon, while I was deep in the countryside of Turkish, I saw him again. He was sitting by a dusty road, doing the exact same repetitive motions. I was in an official car, driving at high speed. There was no way a man on foot could beat me back to the city. Yet, when I arrived at the campus that evening, he was already there, sitting at the bus stop. Same clothes, same vacant stare. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the mind, but the chill in my bones told me otherwise. The most dangerous of these glitches, however, happened to my cousin. He was cycling home late one night, around 11 p.m., passing through a sharp bend in the road dominated by a massive, ancient tamarind tree. In our culture, tamarind trees are known as magnets for the restless. My cousin was pedaling hard, eager to get past the shadows of the tree. But as he rounded the bend, he slammed on his brakes. The single dirt path had vanished. In its place, the road had fractured into 8 identical paths, fanning out like the fingers of a skeletal hand. Logic deserted him. He stood there, trembling, unable to decide which path led home and which led into the abyss. He knew there was only one road, yet his eyes screamed that there were 8-inch. The moment he realized he was being hunted by a visual hallucination, an optical curse, he lost control. He crashed violently into the trunk of the great tree. He survived, but he was never the same. Later, we found out that every driver who had ever flipped their truck or crashed their bike at that specific turn said the exact same thing. They didn't fall asleep. They didn't lose their brakes. They simply reached the bend and found that the world had split into 8 different directions, and they chose the wrong 1-inch. This was my story. Now I am moving on to the next story. A year ago, I lived with my family in an upscale neighborhood in the city. My bedroom had a balcony where I spent my nights lost in music, watching the sleeping streets below. It was my sanctuary until one Saturday night. At 1 a.m., a sudden, inexplicable chill crawled up my spine. For the first time in my life, I felt unwelcome on my own balcony. I retreated into my room, but the air inside was even heavier. I distinctly remembered leaving the lights on, yet the room was pitched in total darkness. When I flicked the switch, my heart turned to ice. There, lying on my bed, was a girl. She was wearing my clothes. She had my hair. She had my face. It was a perfect mirror image of me, staring back with wide, unblinking eyes. For a few agonizing seconds, she just watched me. Then, she began to sit up, reaching toward me. The world tilted, and I collapsed into unconsciousness. I woke up the next morning with my mother crying by my side. I convinced myself it was just a fever dream, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion. I stayed silent, and for a month, life returned to normal. But the universe was merely waiting. One afternoon, the silence of the neighborhood was shattered by the scream of an ambulance. I walked to the balcony and looked down. The vehicle had stopped directly in front of our gate. It sat there for 10 minutes, its lights pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, the back doors opened. Paramedics pulled out a gurney carrying a body bag. As they shifted the sheet, I saw the face of the deceased. It was me, cold, pale, and lifeless. The shock was so violent that my mind simply shut down. When I finally opened my eyes 3 days later, I was in a hospital bed. I begged my mother to tell me what had happened. "You fainted on the balcony?" she whispered. "Your father rushed home. But we couldn't wake you. The ambulance was already waiting at the gate when we called. It was as if they knew. That night in the hospital, the nightmare finalized its grip. I dreamt of a small girl in a tattered burial shroud, her hair trailing like black smoke on the floor. Her voice sounded like grinding stones. "If you speak of what you have seen," she hissed, "the image will become the reality. Leave that house, and keep your tongue silent." I woke up screaming, my parents rushing to my side. I tried to tell them everything about the girl on the bed, the ambulance, the shroud, but as I opened my mouth to speak, my voice was gone. It has been a year since that night. I have visited every specialist and healer available, but the result is always the same. Physically, there is nothing wrong with my throat. Yet, since the moment I tried to betray the secret of that house, not a single sound has crossed my lips. I am a prisoner of a secret that stole my voice to keep itself alive. I am sharing this story exactly as I collected it. This story was told to me by my grandfather. He has always insisted that every word is true, and as he is currently very ill, I ask for your kind thoughts and prayers for him. This is the story of a village that witnessed something that defies the laws of nature. Many years ago, in a quiet, unnamed village, there lived a woman known for her striking beauty. She was obsessed with her appearance, spending hours on her vanity and adornments. However, beneath her outward grace was a sharp tongue and a rebellious heart. She ignored the advice of her elders and treated those around her with cold disdain. Even her husband, who loved her with a desperate, unconditional devotion, could not earn her respect. Suddenly, a violent fever took her life. The village mourned, and she was buried according to tradition. Her husband was devastated, his world collapsing into a void of grief. 2 nights after the funeral, the husband had a dream that felt more like a vision. He saw his wife in a realm of fire and shadows. She was screaming, her body being torn by serpents and scorched by unseen hands. It was a vision of absolute torment. He woke up drenched in sweat, but tried to dismiss it as a trick of his grieving mind. But the dream returned, night after night, more vivid and more horrifying, driven by a gut-wrenching intuition. He approached the local imam and the village elders. He begged them to open the grave. When they finally dug up the earth and reached the coffin, the village stood in stunned silence. The white burial shroud was there, perfectly intact and neatly folded. But it was empty. The body was gone. There were no signs of animals, no tunnels in the dirt, and no way a body could have decomposed in just 5 days. The earth had kept the cloth but rejected the flesh. Terrified and confused, the husband returned to his empty home. He went to wash his face, trying to scrub the image of the empty grave from his mind. But when he walked into his bedroom and looked at the bed, his heart stopped. His wife was there. She was lying on the bed, staring at him, but it wasn't the beautiful woman he had married. This was the woman from his nightmares. Her skin was a map of deep, raw wounds. Her eyes were gone, just hollow, bleeding sockets. Her fingers and toes had been severed. Her lips were torn away, and her scalp was completely bald, as if every hair had been ripped out by the roots. The husband didn't scream. He simply fell. His mind broke in that instant, and he lost consciousness. He never truly recovered. A few weeks later, he passed away, his face frozen in a mask of lingering horror. The villagers, sensing the darkness that had followed the couple, decided that even in death, they should not be close. He was buried in a far corner of the cemetery, miles away from the empty grave of the wife who had returned from the shadows. My grandfather believes this happened because she lived a life of arrogance, and treated her sacred bonds with contempt. It serves as a chilling reminder that our beauty fades, but the weight of our character follows us into the dirt.